The city plunged into darkness, and the hum of the drones ceased abruptly. Nyx stood in the control room, her breath catching in her throat as she tried to process what had just happened. The EMP had done its job. At least, it should have. The screens in front of her had gone blank, and for a moment, there was now a dead zone, devoid of its ever-present surveillance, a silence that had never existed before. Jax's voice broke through the stillness, rough with tension. "We've bought ourselves time, but we're not out of the woods yet. The drones might be down for now, but it won't be long before they reset, and when they do, the city will go back to its mechanical grind." Nyx nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Time. That's all we needed. But time's not going to be enough unless we do something. Nyx checked the clock for a little past 5. The cold air in the underground hideout seemed to press in on them. Nyx felt a coldness deep in her chest, an uneasy feeling that came not just from the absence of light, but from the sheer weight of the moment. The city above was still alive, still burning with the remnants of the Purge. The lights had gone out, but it didn't mean the end of the conflict. It only marked the beginning of a new phase, one where survival and rebellion would shape the course of everything. Jax was already moving, his fingers flying over another console, reprogramming the system to ensure they had full control. His face was lit by the dull glow of the emergency lights that flickered on the walls. Despite his calm exterior, Nyx could see the exhaustion in his posture, the weariness that was beginning to catch up with him. The man who had once cracked codes like an artist was now fighting not just to survive, but to reclaim something they'd both lost: a city, a purpose, and their freedom. "How long do we have?" Nyx asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though the weight of everything was threatening to break her resolve. "Not long," Jax replied without looking up. His hands didn't stop moving over the panels. "Once the drones reset, they'll be scanning every sector. We've got a narrow window to move before they get back online and come after us. If they manage to reboot fully, we won't be able to stop them." Nyx exhaled sharply. "Then let's make the most of it." She was done waiting. She knew what needed to be done. "I'm going to the surface. The longer we stay down here, the more vulnerable we are. The drones will detect our location eventually." Jax stopped typing for a moment, his gaze flicking toward her, his eyes narrowed in concern. "It's not safe. The surface is crawling with enforcers and their lackeys. Even without the drones, they'll be looking for us. They'll be looking for anyone who's still standing. The resistance won't be enough to hold them off if they find us." "I know," Nyx said, her voice firm. "But we have a chance now, Jax. The Purge is already underway. If we can get to the heart of their operations, hit them where it hurts, we might have a chance of ending this once and for all." Persephone caught his gaze. She had never met his eye before. He stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, he gave a single nod, his lips pressed into a thin line. "All right. We're in this together. But we need to move fast. The drones will be down, but everything else is still active." They both knew what was at stake. The corporate behemoths that controlled the city, the ones that had driven the world into the ground, would not go down without a fight. This wasn't a rebellion, it was a war. And the stakes had never been higher. Nyx adjusted her jacket, feeling the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. She reached into her bag, pulling out her sidearm. A relic from the old days, a piece of equipment that had once been standard for anyone involved in the resistance. The gun was heavy in her hand, but it felt familiar, like an extension of herself. The last time she had used it, she'd fired at a corporate enforcer who'd tried to take her life, but that was a long time ago. Now, it was a tool for something far greater. She glanced at Jax one last time. "We'll need to get to the central server. It's where their primary operations are controlled. It's the only way to end this. If we can shut down their entire system, We can cripple them. Jax swallowed hard, but nodded again. Let's go then. But we have to be careful. It's not just the drones we need to worry about. The enforcers are hunting down anyone who's still a threat. The two of them emerged from the underground shelter, stepping into the dim light of the city. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning buildings, a reminder of the chaos that had erupted when the Purge began. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual sounds of city life muted under the heavy blanket of destruction. The drones had gone dark, but the enforcers had taken their place. Armed soldiers clad in dark armor roamed the streets, their guns slung at their sides, ready for any sign of rebellion. Nyx and Jax moved quickly, slipping through alleyways and avoiding the main thoroughfares where the enforcers were patrolling. The city's skyline was a jagged silhouette against the night sky, broken by the occasional flare of light as another building caught fire. They didn't speak much as they moved, each of them focused on the task at hand. The resistance had taught them how to survive in a city that had long abandoned its humanity. Now, it was about something more. As they neared the heart of the city, Nyx's mind raced. The central server was located in a heavily fortified building, one that housed the corporate headquarters and served as the nerve center of their operation. It was surrounded by layers of security, both human and electronic. Breaking in would require more than just hacking into their systems. It would require precision, speed, and a hell of a lot of luck. Operating by the code of law, Cyclops said. We're almost there, Jax whispered, his voice tight with urgency. The building's ahead. They paused, ducking behind a large piece of debris. From their vantage point, they could see the entrance to the headquarters. Armed guards stood watch, scanning the perimeter for any sign of trouble. They were professionals, well trained in spotting threats. But Nyx wasn't afraid, not anymore. She reached for the small earpiece hidden beneath her hair. This is it, she said. We're going in. Jax nodded, his face tense. I'll take care of the tech, you handle the rest. Nyx pulled the collar of her jacket up, hiding her face as much as she could. Then, without another word, she slipped out from behind the debris and into the shadows, moving toward the building. Her heart pounded in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The city had been on the brink of collapse for years, and now it felt like the moment they had all been waiting for. She reached the side entrance where a guard stood, scanning the alleyway. She knew that getting past him would be tricky. One wrong move and they'd be caught. She stayed low, watching his every move. Her body was tense, ready to spring into action. She needed to get close. The guard turned his back for just a moment, his focus distracted by something in the distance. Nyx seized the opportunity, slipping silently past him and into the building. She moved quickly, ducking into the shadows, knowing that the real challenge was still ahead. The interior of the building was cold, sterile, everything it represented. The walls were sleek, metallic, and devoid of any warmth or personality. It was a place designed to evoke control, a machine built to suppress, not to inspire. But Nyx had come here for one thing: to bring it all down. She moved swiftly through the corridors, her steps almost inaudible on the polished floors. She could hear the faint hum of computers, the soft click of security doors opening and closing. She had to be careful, had to keep her head down. The last thing she wanted was for an alarm to go off before they had the chance to access the server room. At last she found the door she was looking for, the access point to the central server. But it was locked. Of course it was. She crouched in front of it, pulling out her hacking device, an old but reliable piece of equipment that Jax had managed to retrofit over the years. She inserted the device into the panel, her fingers working quickly as she bypassed the security. The door clicked open, and she was inside. The server room was vast, filled with rows upon rows of machines, all humming with activity, the heart of the corporate empire, its lifeblood flowing through countless wires and data streams. Nyx's eyes scanned the room, searching for the main terminal. There. At the far end, behind a row of terminals, the system's core was housed in a locked cage, but that wouldn't stop her. Her fingers flew over the controls, her mind focused on the task at hand. If she could access the core, she could disable the system from the inside, severing the connection between the drones and their creators. She knew that it would send shockwaves through the corporate structure, but it was their only shot. Just as her fingers touched the final command, a voice echoed from the doorway. "Did you really think you could escape?" The voice was low, guttural, and familiar. Nyx froze. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. It was Reyes, the enforcer captain who had been hunting them since the beginning of the resistance. He stepped into the room, flanked by 2 other heavily armed soldiers. The doors slid shut behind them, sealing Nyx's fate. Her heart skipped a beat, but she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. She turned, the last shred of defiance burning in her eyes. "I'm not escaping," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "I'm ending this." Nyx's fingers hovered over the control panel, her mind racing as she tried to process the situation. She knew the drones were merciless, nearly unstoppable, but the fire in her eyes told a different story. Jax had his doubts, and perhaps he was right to do so, but this was their only chance. The Purge had already begun. If they didn't act now, everything they'd fought for, the resistance, the remnants of rebellion, even their fleeting hope, would be obliterated in the blink of an eye. He glanced at Jax, who was still bent over the console, his eyes scanning the multitude of screens flickering in front of him. The glow from the monitors cast a cold light across his features, making him look like a man lost in time. His scruffy beard was longer than it had ever been, his clothes a mismatched jumble of whatever scraps he could get his hands on. But Nyx knew that beneath the disheveled exterior was the sharpest mind she'd ever met, the hacker who had once been able to crack corporate networks with ease, who had saved their lives more times than she cared to count, was now playing the same game. But this time the stakes were higher. The city, the world, was at risk. They couldn't afford to fail. "You're not listening, Nyx," Jax said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You can't just hack into their systems like you're downloading a song. These drones are the cutting edge of military tech. The firepower they pack is beyond anything we've seen before. You can't just erase them with a keystroke." Nyx clenched her fists. "I don't care about the firepower. I care about the message. This is about the last shred of resistance. You know what's at stake." The room around them seemed to close in, the weight of the moment suffocating them both. Outside, the sound of the drones continued to grow louder, their presence undeniable. The air smelled of smoke, of burning circuitry and the lingering scent of ozone. The city was on fire in every sense of the word, and in the center of it all there was Nyx, an outcast, a joke, a relic of a time when laughter still had meaning, but now, she was their last hope. Jax's fingers hovered over the console as well, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "You want to send a message. You really think hacking their systems will do anything? They'll wipe us off the map before we even get a chance to make a dent?" Nyx stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't think it'll be easy, Jax, but we've been fighting our entire lives for this. Our freedom, our humor, our right to say whatever we want, even if it's at the expense of those who think they can control us. This is bigger than just hacking a system. This is about sending a message that they can't control our minds or our will. They can kill us, sure, but they'll never take away our spirit." Jax looked at her, his eyes dark and tired. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice quieter now, softer. "You're right, but if we fail, it's over. There's no coming back from this." She nodded, knowing he was speaking the truth. The consequences of failure were clear. and they were deadly. The drones would sweep through every hidden corner of the city, rooting out any remaining pockets of resistance, eradicating any trace of rebellion with brutal efficiency. They had become the enforcers of corporate rule, the ultimate symbol of a world where freedom was nothing more than a memory. If Nyx and Jax couldn't stop them, the last laugh would die here, tonight, and no one would ever remember it. No. Nyx's gaze turned back to the control panel. She needed to focus, to shut out the fear creeping into her bones. There was no turning back now. They were in this together, for better or worse. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'll work on the drones' comms systems. If I can get into their frequencies, I might be able to scramble their targeting systems long enough to make a move. We can't take them all down, but we can buy ourselves some time." Jax nodded, his expression tight. "I'll work on getting the resistance out. We can't afford to lose anyone else." Together they moved into action, fingers flying across the console. The screens lit up, displaying lines of code, streams of data, and the heart of the machine they were about to challenge. Nyx's mind clicked into overdrive as she analyzed the drone networks, isolating their comms channels and searching for vulnerabilities. She knew how this worked. The drones were nothing more than extensions of their corporate overlords, programmed to follow a set of precise instructions, but even the most advanced technology had weaknesses, and if she could find one, she could exploit it. Her fingers danced across the keys, her eyes scanning the streams of data flashing before her. Every line of code, every command she issued, was a calculated risk. The drones were always watching, always listening. One mistake, and she'd trigger an alarm that would send the whole system into lockdown. But she wasn't about to back down now, not when they were this close. The drone's targeting system appeared on her screen, their red lights blinking ominously as they patrolled the city, scanning for any movement that didn't belong. Their sensors were built to detect heat signatures, chemical trails, and even subtle changes in the atmosphere. Everything about them was designed to hunt down and destroy, but Nyx had something they didn't. Her mind. She reached out, typing rapidly, sending a series of commands to bypass the encrypted layers of the comms system. Her fingers flew across the keys, inputting a code she knew could disrupt the drone's frequency. She'd used this hack before, once, on a smaller scale, but never against something this powerful. This was a different beast entirely. But it was the only chance they had. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she hit enter. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, the screens flashed. "Shit," Jax muttered. "They've detected the breach." Nyx's heart sank. No, not yet. But the drones were already responding. Their frequencies were shifting, their movements becoming erratic. She'd done it. She'd broken through. She'd cracked their comm system, just enough to confuse their sensors and scramble their targeting algorithms. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "They've detected our location," Jax said, his voice tight. "We don't have long." Nyx's mind raced. They had a few moments, but how much could they really do in that short time? The drones had already been alerted. It wouldn't be long before they were swarming the underground, looking for the source of the hack. The resistance was scattered, outnumbered. Even if they made it out, where would they go? The city was a war zone, and the drones were everywhere. "Jax," Nyx said, her voice grim but resolute. "We're going to need a diversion. Something big. Something they can't ignore." Jax turned to her, his face pale. "You're talking about activating the EMP. That could take out the entire grid. The drones will go down, but so will everything else. The city's already on the brink of collapse. If we do this, there's no going back." Nyx stared at him, her gaze unwavering. "We don't have a choice. We do this, and we buy ourselves time. Time to fight back. Time to survive." in the EMP. It was the last resort, the final ace in their sleeve. It had the power to knock out every drone, every camera, every surveillance system, and send the entire city into chaos. But it was risky. The system was old, unreliable, and unpredictable. If they activated it, the city would go dark. There would be no lights, no signals, no communications. It would be a fight in the dark, literally. But it was their only hope. Jax didn't hesitate. He moved to the secondary control console, his hands steady despite the tension in the air. "I'll initiate the sequence. You stay on the drones. If we're going down fighting." Nyx nodded, turning her attention back to the drones. She knew it was coming. The EMP was their last chance to stop the corporate behemoths from crushing them all. As Jax initiated the countdown, Nyx hit the command to send the final pulse through the drone's systems. It was a risky move, sending out a signal to distract them long enough to allow the EMP to do its work. The drones wouldn't go down easy, but if they didn't act now, the city would fall, and they'd be buried beneath the weight of corporate control. The countdown ticked down, the seconds stretching into an eternity. In that moment, Nyx realized something. This was it. The last laugh, the last act of rebellion, would be their defiance, their final statement in a world that had forgotten the meaning of humor, of freedom, of life. The countdown reached 0, and the lights went out. The neon lights of the last laugh flickered weakly as the air inside the grimy club pulsed with anticipation. In a dark corner, the blue haze of 1,000 cigarettes curled into the air, mingling with the scent of stale beer and the faint odor of burnt circuitry. This was the place, the final stand, where the broken souls of the city came to perform, and perhaps finally in the last commandment was the last comedian who still dared perform. Nyx Reaver was no ordinary performer. She was more of a survivor than a comedian, a relic of a forgotten world. Once, she had been a star, the shining face of the late-night broadcasts and viral holograms. But now, in this dystopian future where the corporate overlords ruled, she was a ghost of humor past, telling jokes to the forgotten and the broken, just for the sake of escape. The patrons of the last laugh didn't come for joy anymore. They came for distraction, for a laugh that could stretch their worn-out lives just a little longer. Her footsteps echoed softly on the cracked tiles of the stage. She surveyed the crowd, their blank stares barely acknowledging her presence. Some of them sat hunched over, faces illuminated by the weak glow of their holodevices, disconnected from the world around them. A few occasionally glanced up, but their eyes were dead. Humor had been long drained from them, like so much of the city's soul. Nyx had always prided herself on her ability to get a laugh from even the most desolate crowd, but tonight was different. There was a strange weight in the air, a silence that didn't feel like the kind that came before laughter, but rather the kind that came before something much worse. The hum of drones, the buzz of city surveillance, everything was turning into a cacophony of impending doom. She gripped the mic and spoke into the microphone, her voice a touch rough from years of use, the rasp of age catching in her throat. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was going to tell you all a joke, but the city has already given us a punchline. You know, they say the future is a joke, and I'm starting to think it's one we're all in on." Few heads turned, but the response was as hollow as a dead echo. She let the silence stretch, giving them a moment to adjust to the idea. The moment felt heavy, almost suffocating. All right. Let's get this over with. Did you hear about the cyborg who went to therapy? He said he was having a hard time connecting with others. He said he has a depression pain scale of 0 to 10. A hollow chuckle rose from the crowd, but it was more out of habit than humor. Nyx's eyes scanned the room, taking in their faces. Some were clearly too far gone, their bodies broken by the physical and mental strains of life in this decaying city. Others sat stoically, like ghosts, without purpose, waiting for something, anything, to snap them out of their stupor. She knew she had no real control over them anymore, not since the corporations had taken over. The drones had come to dominate the skies, constantly watching, constantly monitoring. They were the last laugh of the corporate overlords. Their laughter was a barrage of rapid-fire gunshots that rang through the night, stripping the city of its freedom, its humanity. But tonight, there was something darker in the air. Something was coming for all of them. She could feel it. Nyx's gaze flickered over to the back of the room, where a shadowy figure lingered in the corner. She didn't need to look twice to know it was Jax, her old partner. He had been a hacker in the good old days, before the corporations had gotten too powerful. He was the one who'd kept her alive during the early years, when the fight was still about freedom, not survival. But now they were both only trying to get by. He had warned her before the show began. "Something's wrong, Nyx. The drones are changing. You have to be careful tonight." She didn't know what to expect, and tried to watch everything with calm intensity. But she hadn't listened. She never did. The club's atmosphere grew thicker, and the hairs on the back of Nyx's neck stood on end. Something was off. She was no longer sure if it was just the weight of the crowd, the tension of the city, or something more. Before she could say another word, the lights flickered once more. But this time, it wasn't just the usual glitch. The building trembled, a low rumble vibrating through the floorboards. The bar glasses rattled, and the air seemed to grow heavy, pressing against her chest like a vice. Her heartbeat quickened. An explosion, distant but unmistakable, rattled the windows, sending a shudder through the club. And then, just like that, the unmistakable sound of gunfire echoed through the night. Not a random burst, but a constant, steady barrage. 3,000 rounds per minute, a rhythm she knew too well. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was an attack. Her mind raced. The corporate enforcers had developed a new kind of weapon. A fleet of drones capable of firing at an inhuman speed, their guns programmed to take out any resistance with precision. The resistance? No, they weren't just targeting rebels anymore. They were coming for the city's last spark of life, its last flicker of defiance, and Nyx had no idea if she could make it out alive. A loud thud against the stage broke her out of her thoughts, and she turned to see one of the patrons collapse in his seat. The rest of the crowd remained motionless, unaware or uncaring of the chaos unfolding outside. The laugh they had come to hear was already dying in the air, but it wasn't just the humor. It was the last remnants of freedom, of joy, of rebellion. Nyx had to move. She dropped the microphone, the sound of it clattering against the floor drowned out by the distant explosions. Her instincts kicked in and she bolted off the stage, darting toward the back exit. She could hear the drones now, their whirring sound, the low mechanical hum that filled the air with dread. She pushed open the door, stepping into the alley behind the club. The cool night air rushed in, but it did little to calm her nerves. The chaos outside was growing. There was no time to waste. She had to find Jax. He was waiting for her. He was the only one who could help her now. The alley was narrow and littered with old scraps of technology and debris. A faint glow from a distant neon sign illuminated the path ahead, but the rest of the world felt shrouded in darkness. It was hard to breathe. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning plastic. The city was on fire, in every sense of the word. She rounded a corner and the familiar sound of gunfire echoed through the streets. The drones were already moving in, their weapons activated, their sights set on everything in their path. Her heart raced faster. She couldn't outrun them, not in the open. She needed to find cover. Then her wristband buzzed. Her pulse quickened as she saw the incoming message from Jax. "Get out of there, they're coming, the drones." But the message cut off before he could finish. Nyx's eyes darted around, but there was no sign of the drones yet. They were coming for her, she knew that much. But she couldn't be sure when. She had to move fast. The moment Scarbridge passed by the open doors, Nyx held to place for a moment. She typed a quick reply, hoping he was still nearby. "Where are you? The drones?" "They're already here." The response came almost immediately. "Underground. Hurry. We don't have much time. The Purge has begun." The Purge. That was what they'd all feared. The day when the corporate overlords would wipe out every last bit of rebellion and independence in the city. The day when laughter and defiance were no longer allowed to exist. But Nyx wasn't ready to let it die. Not like this. With her breath coming in sharp gasps, Nyx took off again, her boots pounding against the broken pavement. She could feel the drone's presence growing closer, their sensors scouring every corner of the city, their weapons primed for the inevitable purge. The last pockets of resistance were about to be eradicated, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Unless she made it underground. She reached the entrance just as the roar of a drone's engine echoed above her, the sound of its searchlight locking on. She ducked into a nearby doorway, pressing herself flat against the wall, holding her breath. The drone passed over her head, its bright light searching the alley below. But it didn't stop. It kept moving, unaware of her presence. For now, she didn't wait to see if it would return. She had to get inside. The underground was a network of tunnels and safe houses, hidden from the watchful eyes of the drones. Jax had set it up years ago when they first realized how much the corporations were taking over. It had been their last stand, their final hope for freedom. Now, it might be their final refuge. Nyx pulled open the hidden hatch and descended into the darkness, her feet landing on the cold concrete below. Her fingers fumbled for her hollow transponder, but before she could make contact, a voice echoed through the dark. "You mate?" She turned to see Jax, his face as grim as ever. His usual confidence was gone, replaced with the same fear that she felt in her chest. He had seen the drones coming. They were no longer just a threat. They were the end. The control room was small, filled with old tech that still hummed with life. The blinking lights and whirring machines felt like ghosts in a graveyard. But Jax didn't waste time with small talk. His fingers moved over the controls with practiced ease, his eyes scanning the monitors. "The drones are already out there. They're everywhere," he muttered, his voice low, almost defeated. But Nyx's resolve remained unbroken. "Then we stop them." Jax looked at her, his disbelief evident. "You're talking about taking them on? You know what these drones can do. You know the firepower they have." "I don't need firepower," Nyx replied, her voice cold but steady. "I need one last laugh," Nyx said. The monitor flickered in front of them, showing a live feed of the city above. The drones were already deployed, their guns trained on every corner of the streets, ready to unleash hell. Nyx didn't flinch. "Let's bring the laugh back," she whispered.